Well, I have some words for you that come from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verses 31 to 37. Jesus went down to Capernaum, a city in Galilee, and was teaching them on the Sabbath. They were astounded at his teaching because he spoke with authority. In the synagogue there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice. That is, Jesus called out with a loud voice. Oh no, I'm wrong. Let me start that again. In the synagogue there was a man who had the spirit of an unclean demon, and he cried out with a loud voice, "Let us alone! What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." When the demon had thrown him down before them, he came out of him without having done him any harm. They were all amazed and kept saying to one another, "What kind of utterance is this? For with authority and power he commands the unclean spirits, and out they come." And a report about Jesus began to reach every place in the region. May these words be to us our light and our life. You'll find out in a moment why my misreading of that is so appropriate for this sermon. But first, a story. There was once a monastery that was very strict. Following a vow of silence, no one was allowed to speak at all. But there was one exception to this rule. Every 10 years, the monks were permitted to speak just 2 words, hopefully sharing something that they had learned in those 10 years of silence. After spending his first 10 years at the monastery, one monk went to the head monk. "It's been 10 years," the head monk said. "What are the 2 words you would like to speak?" "Bed hard," said the monk. "I see," replied the head monk. Well, 10 years went by, and the same monk returned to the head monk's office. "It's been 10 more years," said the head monk. "What 2 words have you to say now?" "Food stinks," said the monk. "I see," replied the head monk. Yet another 10 years passed, and the monk once again met with the head monk, who asked, "What are your 2 words now?" "I quit." "Well, I can see why," said the head monk. "All you ever do is complain." Well, by contrast, we live in a world overrun by words and information. Every day, thousands of words stream by our eyes and our ears on phones and computers, newspapers, signs, radio, and television. With all of these avenues of communication accessible to us, talk is perhaps the cheapest it has ever been. Anything I might say to you in a Sunday sermon, you can find on the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Our words can also reach across the world in an instant. Does this mean our words matter more or less these days? Should we care more or less about the words we post on Facebook or put out into the world in other ways? How much power do our utterances, a sentence, a phrase, or even just one word really have these days? And what power do Jesus' words have? Well, we might think of some of the greatest words ever spoken. Of course, Google provides some suggestions, but of course only in English on my computer. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The pen is mightier than the sword. If anything can go wrong, it will. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. All you need is love. I have a dream. And Jesus made one particular list with his last words on the cross. It is finished. Words can inspire, but they can also be weapons. Words are used to dehumanize, divide, and destroy. Just think of all the terrible names people call each other, or the destructive power of a word like enemy. Whether for good or for ill, words are powerful. Words can create reality and change it. What words have you heard recently that changed things for you? An apology, a greeting, a declaration of love, an invitation, a diagnosis, a pregnancy, a critique, an inspiration, an offer, a death. Words often mark turning points in our lives. Well, such is the case for the man with the unclean spirit in today's scripture. Jesus is in the temple teaching on the Sabbath, and remember how that went in last week's reading. And he meets a man with an unclean spirit possessing him. Jesus notices the man and speaks to the unclean spirit, saying, "Be silent, come out of him." Hearing these words, the spirit leaves the man. This encounter invites us into this mysterious connection between words and spirit. Was it the words Jesus spoke that cast out the spirit like some Harry Potter spell? Or was it something beyond the words? If you think about it, words themselves perhaps are merely empty vessels. Their meaning comes from the context. Who is saying them? How were they said before? Why are they being said now? And how are they heard? And sometimes words carry an authority that far exceeds their context. Whether or not Jesus really said all the words he is quoted as saying in the Bible, I believe the experience of Jesus conveyed by the gospel writers was that his words mattered. His words carried an extra authority. His words made a difference. One of our family's favorite stories is Charlotte's Web. Wilbur and Fern, Charlotte, and Templeton the rat are permanent residents in our imaginations. I once heard children's book author Deborah Lee Rose say that Charlotte's Web is really about the power of words. Charlotte writes words on her web above Wilbur in hopes of keeping him from the slaughterhouse. You might remember it started with the words, some pig, then terrific, and then radiant. In the end, those words saved Wilbur's bacon. E.B. White, the author of Charlotte's Web, makes clear his belief in the importance of words in the very last lines of the book. He wrote, "It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both." Perhaps most of the time, however, words seem to get in the way, and in fact can confuse things. Listen carefully to these honest attempts at communication taken from real church bulletins. The Reverend Merriweather spoke briefly, much to the delight of the audience. Low self-esteem support group will meet Thursday at 7 to 8:30 p.m. Please use the back door. Barbara remains in the hospital and needs blood donors for more transfusions. She's also having trouble sleeping and requests tapes of Pastor Jack's sermons. Sometimes words take us in the opposite direction of where they were intended. Sometimes we are simply at a loss for words. And sometimes what is not said is more important than what is said. One of the most powerful words to each of us is our name. Our name is tied to our history, our identity, even our vocation. Throughout history, people have named things as a way of knowing them. Even today, newly discovered species are given new names. Recently, a new kind of wasp was named Ampulex dementor. Yes, this new wasp was named after the Dementors in Harry Potter. And even if something isn't really new, it can be transformed just by giving it a new name, like just up the street where anything on a stick suddenly sounds so enticing. The unclean spirit spoke Jesus' name as if to say, I know you. I know who you are. I know what you've come for. The Spirit says, what have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Think of the power of knowing someone's name and what a difference that makes in your relationship with them. And isn't it therefore interesting that we worship a nameless God? Perhaps you remember that in Exodus, Moses asked God for God's name. God's answer is written in the Bible, but originally was written without the vowels, its exact pronunciation kept secret among the priests. It might be something like Yahweh, but that simply means I am who I am. This unnamed God escapes the limitations of words, reminding us that God is beyond our ability to know and beyond convenient definition. How do you feel about giving authority to something beyond your knowing? This is one of the dilemmas of faith in modern times. At the end of this Sabbath scene, the people who heard Jesus' words are amazed and ask, what kind of utterance is this? They gave divine authority to Jesus and his words. We don't trust these days anyone who claims their authority comes from on high. Most authority is given. So to whose words do you give authority? Robert Siegel and Audie Cornish? Mary Oliver and Billy Collins? J.K. Rowling and E.B. White? What authority do you give these words, particularly the words of Jesus? I really want to know. I would love to hear from you how these words are your light in your life.